Once you become educated about what can happen to horses when somebody gives up on them, it's going in knowing that it's this commitment. And so making that commitment and having that dedication to it, because the buck stops with you as a horse owner.
There are healers on this planet with the power to soften the suffering of mankind, yet they have remained in the recesses of the world, abused, discarded, and labeled as trash. This is The Touch of a Mustang. I am your host, Shalise Clough, and I'm here to tell the story of wild horses, Mustangs, and the humans who are discovering and sharing their gifts while working to protect their well-being and preserve their spirit so this divine power won't be lost. Join us on this quest with the wild Mustang. Chelsea has always loved animals and initially thought she would become a veterinarian. Through a series of opportunities, life took her down the path of a clinical lab scientist and then a high school educator. She and her husband, seeking a more rural lifestyle, bought land around the same time Chelsea developed skills to become an instructional designer and began working primarily online. This opened an opportunity to begin to imagine what could be made of the land she and her husband purchased. As pieces fell into place, Chelsea developed an educational and rescue center where humans and horses become partners in healing and learning. Hi, Chelsea. It's so great to have you here at The Touch of a Mustang. I'm excited to talk with you today about the work that you do. I follow you a little bit on Instagram and really enjoy the things you post and the way you approach animals.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been a really exciting opportunity to get to chat with you live.
To kind of tell your story, you said you've always loved animals, but it wasn't horses necessarily that drew you to them first. So how did it come to be that you're now working with horses and sharing them with other people?
Yeah, it's funny how things work out like that. So yeah, I've worked with animals my whole life and been a vet tech a very long time, did small animal. In college, I was pre-vet and, thought for sure I wanted to go to vet school, did my horse hours, but working with them kind of exclusively from that veterinary focus, not having a background, it was intimidating at the time. And life took me another direction, and I've always stayed involved in veterinary medicine, but didn't really come back to horses until the last couple of years. And we had an opportunity to move to farmland. That was something that I had always really dreamed of doing. And I was thinking it was going to be small animals that I got into because that's what I've always done. So I'm like, we'll get some goats, something easy, which is so funny because once I finally got more hands-on, goats are not easy.
We have some goats. They're a little wild.
Oh my gosh. So, I went and I volunteered at this farm sanctuary and, just ended up jumping in with both feet thinking I'm going to get my experience and see what I really want to do, build out an educational or a rescue farm or something like that. And just fell in love with the horses. And there was a mutual need where they needed somebody to run their horse program. And my background in education, where I ultimately ended up after college, it just married perfectly. And so I was able to get all this experience working with horses and really find a niche working with people and educating them and just getting into that space where we were bringing people together with the horses and just all the things that I love, the animals, the education, and just being outside in nature and just the peacefulness that comes with working with horses where you're not stabbing them with needles and doing all those things on a regular basis.
It is a little different getting to have them when it's not their kind of traumatic times that they probably don't want to be around you at all.
Yeah, exactly.
So with this first place that you worked, what kind of education did you do as far as the horses were concerned?
So I started out as a basic horsemanship instructor. So, I had been riding for a while at that point. So doing riding with smaller kids or people who were just starting out with horses, coming to it as an adult. And so we found that there in our area really isn't an opportunity for people to get into horses where it's not competitive, right? You might go to a schooling barn. Most of the barns around here are English. And so you're going to get in the saddle and you're going to learn. They don't necessarily groom and they don't necessarily go catch their own horses or participate really in any of the direct care. And so because I didn't have that kind of traditional background, I built my program differently. Like you did go out into the herd and we talked about dynamics and it made it really approachable. It was almost sort of like people were able to get that ownership experience of what it would be like to have your own horse, but in a lesson program. So way slower paced, custom tailored to what the people were needing. I had people who were coming to us after having ridden as kids, but having an accident. And so they stopped riding. And so they wanted to get back into it in a place that was really a safe space. So low stakes, no competitiveness, work on their own schedule, or, little kids. So some of the barns around here won't take kids until they're 5. Well, I can work with a 3-year-old. So we were, taking people where they just didn't fit into what was available with traditional lessons. And so built a program based around that, which ultimately led me to equine assisted learning, because that's what I was doing. I didn't know it at the time. And recently, in the last couple of months, PATH has put out a certification for equine assisted learning. And so I just finished. I was the second cohort to go through that program. So now I've got that credential. I've got to get my portfolio submitted, but got that credential behind my name in addition to my education credentials. And so we're really leaning into that, making it more accessible for people to come where they don't necessarily want to be, hunter jumper.
Are you working on or hoping to start a program that helps horses and humans? Chelsea offers program consultation that provides custom-tailored support to help you expand the value, effectiveness, and client receptiveness of unmounted lessons as a cornerstone of your program. Chelsea can help you create educationally sound and engaging experiences for your students while seamlessly melding horsemanship instruction with applicable practice and life skills. So with the credentialing and you just seeing naturally kind of how the horses teach us, how have those merged for you?
It's been incredible, because with starting out in a sanctuary environment, pretty much all of the horses except for one that I've worked with have been a rescue in one way or another. All of the horses that I currently own, except for one, are kill pen rescues. And so what's been really interesting is in the equine assisted learning, and we're working right now with a mental health professional to bring in equine assisted therapy, having these rescue horses that have their own unique stories and kind of their own quirks and things like that. Even horses that aren't rescues, of course, have their quirks, but people really connect with their stories, what they've been through, where they've come from. The fact that, like, I know for sure one of our horses were his 7th home. Like, it's just incredible what horses go through, and there's not a lot of education about there. People don't necessarily know about kill pens, or how many times, these long-lived animals change hands because of a myriad of reasons. And so being able to share that with people who are working through their own challenges, everybody's working through their own challenges, and finding that connection to where, things finally start to click. And then you're building self-confidence through that, and you're building these relationships, and you're learning hands-on skills. When you're working with your hands, you find that flow. And so kind of separating from all the digital stuff that we do all of the time. There's so many different components to it where people are finding.
Yeah. I mean, rescue horses are not typically horses that a lot of people are drawn to. Why were you kind of drawn to go that route?
I think it's probably because of my background in small animals, right? So like, we would never blame a dog for ending up at the shelter, right? But you do have people who are like, oh, those kill pen horses, they end up there for a reason. It's like, why would we blame a horse for ending up at what is unfortunately equivalent to the horse shelter, right? We don't have shelters for horses to end up. So when they fall on hard times, their owners can't keep them. There's a behavioral problem that somebody can't train through, or isn't skilled enough, or doesn't have the time, whatever, they end up in these bad situations. So for me, it's like, well, all of my dogs are rescues. So that's just been something that's been a passion, my whole life. When I was a kid, I'd pick worms up off the sidewalk and go put them in. It's my nature to be drawn to these kind of animals that need the support. So, I've made a joke on Instagram recently, like, we're the island of misfit toys. Like, even my most recent rescues were their second home from the rescue that we adopted them from. We didn't pull them straight from the kill pen. They were pulled through a rescue, went through a rehab, were adopted out, and then returned for their own reasons. And so now they're with us, and I think we'll be able to provide them a forever home. It's just with what we're doing with people, because they do connect with those stories, it's almost like what would be, to their detriment somewhere else, right? They might be judged, or like, that rescue horse, it's got problems. People are drawn to that. It's almost like an asset.
Yeah, I love that. Do you think part of that is because as people, we often don't feel like we fit in? We don't feel like we have a place also, and they're able to resonate with that with the horses?
Yeah, I would say 100%, because they're non-judgmental, right? I mean, they're going to tell you if there's something off, if your energy's off, you're being too intense, something like that. They're going to be really honest with you. But if you adjust, they're going to be like, okay, great. There's no repercussions there. So it's a really honest and non-judgmental relationship. And so, some of the clients that I work with, often preteen girls, right? And that's where we're really struggling to find our place in the world, and maybe we don't
Yeah.
fit in with this clique or that clique, or just even if it's just our own perception of ourselves, working through that with the horses and seeing where, like, man, this horse wasn't unwanted, or it was unwanted, but boy, I really love him. And so to be able to kind of have that kinship.
Yeah. How have you seen that that's helped teens maybe outside of the horse crowd?
So I think just building community. So, with my volunteers and myself, and building these relationships, having somebody else to go to, right? Like, these kids have wonderful families and who are really supportive, but sometimes you don't want to go to mom or dad. And so
Yeah.
having, that relationship, or building friendships with other students that, extend beyond the farm. I think it's giving them the confidence and those social skills and the opportunity to build relationships outside of, whatever other extracurriculars or school and things like that, to find people with common interests.
Yeah. And what made it so that you've kind of built your life around this now, purchased property. You said you didn't grow up with horses.
Mhm.
When did you start personally getting into horses, and what kind of created that drive that this was something you wanted to provide for other people?
So, I mean, I think most people who have spent time around horses, they're kind of addictive, right? Like, we could find 100 memes on that with one quick Google search. So 6 months into it, I was like, okay, I'm ready to rescue my own horse. And so I have a very supportive and maybe too enabling of a husband who's like, okay, fine. We didn't have any fencing up at our property when we bought our property. It was all leased to a farmer who was farming corn. So I had land, but I wasn't able to use it. So I was fortunate to be able to rescue a horse and have, the community from the sanctuary walk me through that process. So it was much lower stakes because I was boarding him there, and I had people
Mm,
who were lifelong, horse people who were able to support me through that. And I found that was challenging, but in such a rewarding way. Because my first horse was a standard bred, which I had no idea what I was getting into. I ended up, I bailed a driving horse.
yeah.
I've never been under saddle before, and that's still a work in progress. Gosh, it's been 3-4 years now since we got him, and it's still a work in progress. But it's so rewarding because when it clicks, it's just so awesome. So I would say it was just, I got bit by the bug. So within 6 months
Yeah.
of being there, I was like, this is what I want to do. And so, I rescued that first horse, and it went so well. Not to say that there weren't challenges, right? But it was just every day going out there. Anytime something went wrong or not quite right, or it wasn't, I was like, okay, so I'm going to go, I'm going to talk to this trainer. I'm going to read this resource. I'm going to educate myself,
Mm,
and we're going to try again tomorrow. And it was just every single day. That's just keeps you coming back. And just kind of snowballed from there. It was funny because shortly after we bailed him, I was made aware of another horse that was in need of rescue, who was like my dream horse, a pinto, little pony guy. And
hmm
then I had a second horse. So
Those dream horses.
horses, yeah. So just being really fortunate and having a super supportive family, my parents, my husband, and everybody was like, if this is what you want to do, let's see how it goes. And I've been really fortunate to be successful in having just built this community of like-minded people that want to come and help and do these things for these rescue horses that are finding value for themselves in doing so.
Yeah. Now, you said your first horse has taken a while, and that when something went wrong, you'd kind of go and like look and see what could you learn, what did you need to do different.
Mhm.
How do you think you developed that mindset to not? I think a lot of horses end up in rescue situations because I think people probably get in to them with good intentions and maybe want this thing for them. And I'm especially speaking about Mustangs. A lot of people
Yeah.
kind of have these dreams about Mustangs, and then they end up being difficult. And so they get offloaded to new owners, kill pens,
Mhm.
put in bad places. So what was it about your mindset, how you went into this, that you were determined to keep going versus like, this is not going as I imagined it. We're gonna we're gonna cut our losses and try again.
Yeah, I think it's once you become educated about what can happen to horses when somebody gives up on them, right?
Yeah.
So especially with your Mustangs, right? Because some of those they've been untouched, so they haven't been worked with. You're starting from square one with an animal that's effectively wild, and so when you pull these horses from kill pens, regardless of their background, you don't know what they've been through. So you
Yeah.
really are starting with, in my case, like I said, a completely green horse, never been under saddle. I think it's going into it knowing that it's this commitment. And so making that commitment and having that dedication to it, because the buck stops with you as a horse owner. Because where else do they go? If in my situation where it was low stakes and that I wasn't looking to compete. And I will say that if I had rescued a horse with the intention of like, okay, I'm going to become a barrel racer, or anything other than I want to ride for pleasure, I want to spend time with horses, this is not something that I'm looking for it to be, again, competitive. I think that that's maybe part of it. That allowed me to have, the gift of time. He was 14 when I rescued him. And so, in my mind, I'm like, well, we've got at least 10 years to work on this, right? And if we're lucky, we'll get you to 34, we'll have 20. So I think it was always celebrating the small wins, the small progress, and knowing that it, like any relationship, right? It's going to be a give and take, and you have to meet your horse where they're at, and just keep working on it.
Yeah, recognizing those small steps of progress, I think, is so key, especially to a horse that is well trained and has a good foundation. And which, again, I think goes to our personal life, because a lot of times we do have these lofty goals that are really difficult to reach, and we maybe don't have the skills for at the time that we start them. And so we either give up or leave these gaps or feel like a failure because we're not recognizing the small little steps that we need to take.
Yeah, and I think that in equine assisted learning is one of those big takeaways where you're matching what you're doing with your horsemanship with your life, because you should dream big, right? Your goals should scare you, like that's how big they really should be. But it's not a beginning and an end. You've got all of those little pieces. What are you going to do every day? One thing, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. And that's really all the longer you should be working with some of these things with these horses. And so just having those really realistic steps that you're going to take to reach your, exciting, almost unrealistic goals, right? And so I think that mindset is what I hope that my clients walk away from our sessions with, where we're working on these small things. Maybe today we only spent 10 minutes working on something that was hard, and then we went back to something that was easy. So that way we are showing ourselves like, I can do this and I can't do this yet, but we're going to get there.
And do you ever have people that come to you that really struggle with that? Because a lot of our culture is very outcome based. It's very, what you accomplish and how well you do it,
Yeah.
grades and all those things. Is that
Yeah.
a struggle for people to come and transition to that? Or how does that
Yeah,
play out?
it can be. And that's a big part of sort of like an onboarding process for people as they get into what we're doing with our work. Is some of it's going to seem unstructured, some of it's going to seem slow paced. And it's like, I'm sure in most people's life, like you don't need more deadlines. Like these are things that we're going to work through slowly. So I think it's managing people's expectations. But when you ask me that, you make me think about when I was first working with clients and just horsemanship things. I was really clear with people, like, we're not a competitive barn. Like if you're after ribbons and things like that, I've got wonderful contacts that I can refer you to. But I did have a student who was pursuing acting and wanted to be able to put horseback riding on their acting resume. They didn't tell me that up front, because I would have thought, okay, so
maybe not the place.
send you someplace else, because they also, and there are some people who really do have natural talent with riding or with horses, and they were going to need some more support. And it was a challenge where I did eventually refer them out, because they were so goal oriented and outcome based. And you just try to support people through, what are you hoping to get out of this? And if it is just outcome, we have to remember that not only are we working on, your skills and your timeline, but with the horses that we're working with, they're not little robots. So we're going to have to build that relationship and work through their challenges, in addition to it. So managing expectations and just providing as much support as you can, because I think, certainly that student was capable of accomplishing that goal, but maybe not on the timeline that they had set up.
How did you develop that approach and strategy to, you came from a veterinary background, which I'm sure the horses were in there, like you have to get something done. It's not just like, let's make friends with them. How did you develop that approach where time is not really a factor that you consider as a top priority?
So I think that's where my background in education comes in. So although, I've always done the veterinary medicine, that I did end up after college becoming a secondary teacher. So I taught high school science for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked at a lower income school, so working with at-risk kids for
Mm,
the beginning of my teaching career. And although, right, you still had to get through your curriculum, you still had to pass state tests, you still
mm-hmm.
had to hopefully pass the class.
Right.
Sometimes when you're working with students who, potentially have special needs, are behind, you might be in high school, but that doesn't mean you're at a high school reading level. And that makes all academics really challenging.
Yeah.
Or you've got English language learning students. We've got this much time together. We do have this end goal, but working with them, meeting them where they're at, and giving them some sort of value out of their experience in a course that I was teaching, regardless as to whether or not they ultimately meet what, the state or the county was meeting at, as an expectation. You want them to leave saying, well, I did make progress. And so if I have to do this again, I'm starting from, 50%, and maybe now I'll make it to 100. So
Mm,
I think it's my background of working with education, because you have to set those targets, those learning goals. And if you don't hit it, you can't keep moving on. You've got to keep at that. You can't just, well, this week we're going to work on this and now we're done with it, even though you guys don't get it. We want to keep kind of
yeah.
going back to those things. And so I think that has been supportive of my approach. I think coming to it where many instructors, riding instructors and things like that, they're horse people, right? Like they've been with horses their whole lives. Their passion is horses. They maybe don't have that instructional or pedagogical background to be able to meet the needs of every single student. That's where you've got those people who are like, oh my gosh, man, when I was a kid, my instructor yelled at me. And so sort of stepping away from that and taking the expertise of some of those people that I've had the benefit of working with myself, and changing the structure of the program.
Yeah. Did you see that approach with kids? Because even in school, we can sometimes say, your time's up, you got to see, let's move on type of thing. It
Yeah.
sounds like you were much more focused on really just giving them an opportunity to be successful at something. How did, even in the educational environment, how did that end up being your focus? Because I know teachers get a lot of pressure for like test scores and getting
Mhm.
students and, having kids read by the time they're 5 and things like that. So how did you manage that and come to that approach?
So I will say, with working with those underserved and at-risk populations, I was really fortunate in having administration at the school level who understood that even though we have these certain expectations and things that we have to meet, it's not a realistic goal in this time frame for these students. So
Mm-hmm.
long as they were demonstrating progress, I had administration who was supportive of
Mm,
being able to take it that way. Because like you said, if you're got that outcome focus, but you're not focusing on the steps to get there, that path, that journey of understanding knowledge and being able to apply it, you're never going to get there. So I think it was just almost, because I was working with students where there weren't very high expectations overall, because we knew they were starting from kind of behind the starting line, I was given a little bit more freedom to be able to approach that. And in some cases, I was very fortunate that I was working with students who just needed one more science credit, and so it was a non-state standard based course. So like in astronomy or in oceanography, you just need to do one
mm-hmm.
more. You need to do one more science. And so, because there was no, in Virginia, their SOLs, there was no end of year test that I had to make. My end of year test was whatever I came up with. We were able to be a little bit more creative.
Did you see that students excelled more by them having that freedom of lowered expectations, or not even lowered expectations, but maybe just not the time limit and the stress of, you need to do X, Y, and Z?
I think setting those manageable goals, and then when you're working with people, but especially with young people, your teenagers and things like that, relationships are everything. You want to be honest and you want to be genuine. And so I think telling them, like, you really do have to do XYZ, but we're going to support you in doing that. If that means that instead of writing a paper, you're going to do a project and you're going to do something creative, we're giving them the opportunity for multiple means of expression or engagement, meeting them where they're at. And, that's really what I try to bring to my horse programs as well, is just working with students with, what are you coming to me with? Have you worked with horses before? Are you here because you have a fear? And then I'm matching them with a horse that's going to be receptive to that energy, and we're going to make progress. The goal is for them to be able to work with any horse on the property, but we're going to start with one that is calmer and what they're going to perceive as safety. And we're going to move a little bit out of their comfort zone, every single time.
One of the things I think is really powerful about, whether it's at-risk teens or people who are struggling, or, the rescue horses, all those people who maybe aren't able to go so easily with the agenda of the world around them, that those are the ones that really push us to think outside the box, to find other ways to get to the same end goals. How has that impacted you, or how do you use that in your work?
So I will say that I have spent a lot of time putting together what I would consider a curriculum, so like, here are the things that I want students to be able to do, and here's the way that we would achieve that. Like, today we're going to work on leading, and these are the activities that I would take a student through, something like that. But it doesn't always work. If you've got a student who's struggling with attention or with anxieties about things, you're going to have to break that down even further. So I go into these sessions with my clients with a goal or with an approach in mind, but when it's time to pivot, you have to be prepared to sort of pivot on the fly. And so just meeting them where they're at and giving them a space to be able to do that. Because you're right, in some situations you're going to have to follow the rules, and you have to follow the guidelines and the protocols of how to do something. But I think giving them that space where we can be creative together, find solutions. Okay, so what you're doing, the horse isn't responsive, so he seems afraid of the level of energy that you're bringing. If I've got a really busy kid who just can't sit still, what can we do? Do you need to take a break? Do we need to get the wiggles out? Like, things like that, where we're going to step back, we're going to reevaluate how is the horse responding to what your communication. We talk a lot about nonverbal communication, like your body language, the things that you're doing that maybe you don't realize that you're doing. And I hope that students are able to take that, like, oh yeah, maybe, the amount of fidgeting that I'm doing right now is going to be a problem. Maybe I can check in. Maybe I can do something a little differently here.
You got these rescue horses. You started a business with horses when you didn't have a long history with them. What kind of gave you the confidence to do that? And were there times where you were fearful, kind of wondering, like, is this too much, or should I be doing this, or did it just come naturally?
Of course, a little bit of both. I think everybody, no matter what stage you're in or what credentials you have in your profession, like, I think there's always, a little bit of self-doubt or a little bit of anxiety of what happens if it doesn't go the way that I planned. I will say that I just have an incredible community that I have found through this work. So in working at the sanctuary, I was in charge of all of our horse volunteers. And so just wonderful people who just so like-minded. It's all about the welfare of these animals. And it's in any charity work that you do get something back out of it. It's selfless in that your goal is to promote the well-being of whatever it is that you're doing, but the feel good that you get from that, of course. So, I've got a wonderful team of these women who will come out and they help. They are members to our farm, so they provide financial support. I have 10 horses here on property. One of those actually belongs to one of my volunteers. She's rescued him, and so he boards here. I'm not doing it alone, and so very fortunate. I do still work my full-time education job that I do remotely, which, gives me a little bit of a fallback. I'm very fortunate to have a super flexible schedule to where I can still do everything with our equine assisted learning business. But I do keep that job just in case, you never know. So maybe that's one thing that I do to make sure that I still feel like we've got a safety net financially, because horses are expensive, of course.
Yeah.
But, my goal with what we're doing with the business is to be able to support these rescue horses. So, the work that they're doing, I want to make sure that they're always enjoying it. I'm not going to make a horse do something that, is clearly outside of the bounds of their personality or their behaviors or, things like that. And not every horse here really works, to be honest. We've got, a team that really works well and enjoys that. And so we lovingly call them, freeloaders, but, that's okay. They have their value too, because we can talk about the process of kind of healing from traumas, and even just individual personalities. Not everyone is extroverted and wants to meet new people all the time. But yeah, I would say just the incredible community, and our clients who just keep coming back, who find a lot of value in spending this time and learning, and have been really supportive of me as an educator in this space.
I hear a lot of people that are in the horse community that have a hard time kind of finding that community that has approach like that. Do you have advice for how people can develop a community?
Yeah, it takes time. I think you need to be open. Just first and foremost, just because someone doesn't necessarily have experience, it's wonderful when you're hiring somebody to come and help you with chores or something like that, a barn manager, any of those things that I may have been doing in the past with the sanctuary. I pretty much have my team here of my volunteers, and it all stops with me. But especially if you're hiring somebody, that you want somebody with experience, and you don't want to have to train, and it makes you really nervous to have somebody handling your horses, if they don't have that solid background, they didn't grow up with horses, something like that. But I do think that if you invest in people, you can build that community. So you can't just put out your sign and hope that everybody shows up, but if you're offering opportunities for people who want to learn, you can grow within. And so, two of my core volunteers that spend the hours here and are so supportive of everything that we do, they're former students. One of which, hadn't ridden since they were a child. The other one was one of my students that had that fear, had an accident with a horse, and didn't come back to it until adulthood. And so working together, going and attending clinics and things like that as a team, inviting people, looking for opportunities and inviting people out, it has been paramount in helping me to build that community.
Was that ever something that you had doubt about, just the approach that you take? I'm not worrying so much about the timeline, not worrying so much about horses being perfectly trained. Was that something that ever had doubt in your mind?
About being able to draw people?
Just about if, like, so much in the horse community is, there's a lot of rules and your horse needs to be able to do this. And, like, for example, the first stride, you should walk, trot, canter, just different things like that. Your approach is very different, where it's free of a timeline. There's obviously some different use of horses, but did you ever have any doubt about, like, if you were serving the horses well enough, or if this approach was going to be effective?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say that the space of unmounted lessons is sort of that uncharted territory that nobody really wants to get into, right? So if you're running a lesson program, you've got your barn lessons for your rainy day, and every once in a while you're like, man, it would probably benefit this student to do some lunging or something like that. But you're worried about, well, are parents going to be receptive to that? How are we going to work this in and make sure that people are interested in what we're doing, and that we can keep the horses engaged and fit if we're not riding all the time or things like that. And I know that is, you can find all kinds of resources for, like, what to do on your rainy day lessons and things like that. But again, I think that there are people out there that are interested in being free of that competitive space. So if we're thinking about horses more as partners, so we're making sure that their needs are met. We're doing stuff with them and not to them. That's a big pillar in anything equine assisted learning or any equine assisted service. We're doing stuff with the horse, not to them. So I think it's that approach where, everything I feel like that I'm doing is pretty non-traditional. My horses are on 24/7 turnout.
Yeah.
They're all barefoot with the exception of one that has shoes for orthopedic reasons.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's what works for them. They have shelters. They don't even go in half the time when it's I'm talking about potentially fundraising and trying to build a barn right now, but that's for the people, so that we have a meeting space, so that we don't have to get wet, those kinds of things. It's not really as much for the horses. So I think it's challenging some of that conventional wisdom. Certainly if it works, you know what I mean? There's all kinds of stuff. There's all sorts of things that I borrow from training. I love Masterson method. I love positive reinforcement, R+ training, but we do still lunge, and I do still, make sure that my horses have turnout before I'm asking him to deal with a very impatient little child. So I think it's not having conviction for traditionalism for the purpose of that, just because it's
Yeah.
a tradition.
Do you think it helped that you didn't get into horses a lot until you were older, that you're able to just kind of like, I'm not worried about that?
Yes, absolutely. I think that it's one of those things where sometimes I think I benefited from just being, blissfully unaware
Yeah.
of what convention would be and sort of just reinventing the wheel. And so it still turns, it's just a little different. It's been really fun because I'm not feeling a lot of pressure necessarily to conform. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not doubts. I have done several instances of like, well, I'm gonna go take a lesson at this barn, or I'm gonna, ask to go observe here because I want to see what people are doing to make sure that I do know a few things. And
Yeah.
generally you get new ideas anytime that you talk to somebody with horsemanship. Like, you ask one question, you're going to get 99 different answers. But it's been mostly validating that, if what you're doing is working. I think finding a farrier and a vet that's supportive of
Yeah.
you're doing that can be really hard, because even equine vets, somebody that you would think, well, they're going to be really invested in horse and
Yeah.
welfare, not always, because with
Yeah.
animal vets, oftentimes, they're agricultural, they're livestock vets, and so these animals serve a purpose to them. That approach, and I try not to alienate anybody. I want what's best for the animals always, but we got to work together. I'm not saying big ag is bad or any, if you're working your horse is great. It's just, I hope that all horses have a soft landing spot.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think just being unconventional, bucking the tradition, because I didn't even necessarily know all of it when I started, was to my benefit.
Yeah. I think it's really good to have that approach where you can kind of look at it and say, this didn't work, so let's find what it is, whether it's, finding vet care, or that was a place we hit a hard spot. I had
Yeah.
a vet with my really sensitive Mustang, and she just kind of marched in. I had like separated the horses. I put her aside last, and I was like putting up another horse, and she just marched in there, and it was not a good experience for anyone. And
Yeah.
she ended up telling me my horse was dangerous and it needed training. And this is a horse my kids could, go and get on, but she could sense something different. So I think it's really valuable to just, if it's not working, it's okay to try something else, to see what other approaches there might be to get to the same
Yeah.
end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that you have excellent perspective on when you have, a Mustang or an animal that is, you may have done all of the training, but they do still have those instincts. And so it's self-preservation, right? So they end up in those situations like a vet or a farrier where there's fear, there's uncertainty, they're highly perceptive of people's intentions. And you walk in there with an agenda to just get something done that's going to be unpleasant for the horse, and they may be non-compliant. So if you have your professional services, your dentist, your vet, your farrier, and they're expecting certain behaviors from your horse, and if their way or the highway, yeah, I can imagine that would be a huge struggle in the Mustang community in particular.
Yeah, I found it's really good to be very clear up front with expectations and openness. And, even with this vet, I was like, it's fine. Like, we don't need to do, it was just like a yearly
Yeah.
vaccination or whatever. And I'm like, we don't need to do it. It'll be okay. But I mean, she really wanted to get it done.
Yeah.
So it's okay, I think, to, maybe they don't get vaccinated, this time around, and
Yeah.
to be okay with things not going the way you
Yeah.
expect.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're still providing the best standard of care that the animal allows in some cases, right? I mean, with my donkey in particular, completely feral when we got him,
Mm,
which was a surprise because
yeah.
he was a kill lot veil, and you
Mm,
basically by sight unseen. And so in
yeah.
the little video snippet they were leading him, I'm not sure how they ever did that, but we've got him now to where he can be trimmed by the farrier, but we only do him every other time because he's not in work. His feet are healthy, and we're making it work, and maybe one day that won't be a problem anymore. And same for one of my more recent rescues, my quarter horse, extreme fear of the farrier, and he has to be
Mm,
sedated. And so we sedate him with Dorm gel, and I do a light sedation. He knows what's happening, but it keeps it safe for everyone, and it keeps my farrier happy so that she keeps coming back.
yeah.
And with time, we'll continue to reinforce that, and he'll eventually, hopefully, learn that it's not something to be so terrified of.
Yeah. Do you feel like moving into this work and moving your family to a more rural setting, has that changed life for you guys?
Um, to a certain degree. It's interesting. In the area of Northern Virginia where we're located, we actually only moved 5 minutes away.
Mm,
So we're a suburb of Washington, D.C. And so, I've lived in this area my whole life because of, my parents' jobs. And we always sort of lived on the edge of the rural community. And so for me, I wanted my kids to have more space. I wanted, to be able to have them be outside and enjoy that, not have to worry about traffic and things like that.
yeah,
And just a slower pace. Um, so the moving wasn't a huge impact in getting the land. The horses are very all encompassing for sure. Like you said, our lives have sort of become built around that. But I think in a mostly positive aspect. My kids help me with chores. It gives them a sense of responsibility
yeah,
for certain things, and just spending time outside. Kids they love video games, and they still go and
yeah,
do sports and things like that. But it's being able to be outside, a little bit of unschooling that we do, and things like that, and on summer breaks. And I think it's to the benefit. I think that everyone benefits from unplugging and being outside and just that slower pace, working with your hands, regardless of what that is. Maybe it's just crafting, but
mm-hmm,
for me, it's horses.
yeah. What are some of the lessons that you've learned from horses?
I think it's being present in the moment. Like if I had to say my number one takeaway. So,
Mm-hmm,
for me, just being super type A and a little bit of a perfectionist, like I always have these running lists in my head, right? Of things
mm-hmm,
that I need to do, that I want to do, that I've got to get done, or just anticipating, playing out conversations before they happen. And it's really hard to turn that off. I would say before I started this work, it's challenging to find an outlet that you really enjoy that allows you to sort of find a state of flow where you can be at peace. With horses, you can't be 10 steps ahead of them in your head because it can be dangerous and you're not going to accomplish your goals. The horse is looking to you, every moment. What are you doing here and now? They're not really worrying about, later. It's right here, right now. They're living their lives from moment to moment. So I think that being able to slow down and to focus on
yeah.
where are my feet, where are my hands, what's going on right this second, it has been invaluable.
Yeah, I do think that's a huge lesson also because we live in a world that is so overstimulating, so in our heads, not in the
Yeah.
present so much. How have you seen that affects the people that come to your
Um,
organization?
yeah, I think that is, we get a lot of comments that, oh, it's very peaceful, it's very calm, it's very quiet. And it's a little sad that is a novelty, but
Yeah,
I hope that by opening up our home and our farm to people, that it becomes less of a novelty. You have a place to do it. You go to the gym to work out, unless you're, even if you are in regular therapy sessions, or you go and get coffee with a friend and have a chat every week. What are you doing for your mental wellness, to slow down, to be able to have that sense of peace? And so that's what we offer to people here. It's just a place to come and be calm and be quiet. Um, not to say that we don't do exciting things, but that is
yeah,
the atmosphere that I want to create for people.
yeah, Not everyone can own a horse, but if you live in Northern Virginia, you can still have an equine in your life. Equine Connections Center offers herd membership, giving you access to the farm, providing you with the experience of horse ownership, while supporting the cost of care for their rescue horses. Think of it as a gym membership for mindfulness. Visit, work with, and care for your partner horse while enjoying the benefits of unstructured time with horses. If you aren't close by, virtual membership is offered for those who would still like to enjoy and support the horses. So you work in equine assisted learning, which is really about kind of teaching life skills from horses, right, that can
Mhm.
be transferred over.
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that you've seen horses help us learn better skills for living in the world?
So I think that it's a balance of autonomy and independence and confidence and support, right? And guidelines and things like that. So my approach to these lessons, regardless of what we're working on, is really, I do, we do, you do. And so it's that gradual release of responsibility. And so I'm hoping what I'm doing is empowering people to be able to learn from whatever resource that is. We live in the age of where you watch something on YouTube and you do it. And I think that's amazing. We've
Yeah.
got all of this information. So being able to access it, find a resource, find support, and then be able to do it if that's what you want to do. And so I think it's setting people up for that growth mindset. This is where I'm at. This is my support system, but I'm looking to be able to do this on my own. And, for me, with people who have moved from being my students to being my volunteers, like my most favorite thing is that they're now entering kind of their phase of where they're becoming teachers. And that's where you do most of your learning, is by teaching other people.
Yeah.
So I think it's setting people up for taking those next steps of, shedding the training wheels, getting rid of your water wingies, and really going out and doing. And if you fail, you've got a support system to go back to. Okay, we're going to try again. And I think that you should approach just about everything with that, from kids who are learning to read to adults who are, navigating a change of life. Okay, so you've been raising your kids and now they've grown up, they've graduated, they've moved out. You're looking for something else to do with your life. So, you want to see that as an opportunity. And how are you gonna grab it?
Yeah, I think that does make such a difference, the way we view that, where you just said you want to look at it as an opportunity. That's definitely something that impacts horsemanship and life, is how we choose to view those changes, those struggles, if they're an opportunity to learn and grow, or if it's something that's happening to us that we don't have control over.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. When I rescued my quarter horse back, I think that would have been March of last year. So it's been almost a year now. We pulled him with the intention of him being what would be just a traditional lesson horse. With working with rescue horses, you do have horses that they're serviceably sound, but obviously physical things, and they're older or whatever. So we were in need of another horse for the lesson program. And he was not suited for that work. And so I really had to look within myself and look at him and say, okay, well, I don't think you're worthless. I did have somebody call him a dud. And when you hear that from the outside, I think it was a joke. And
Yeah.
as a lesson horse, absolutely. But as a being, as some, a partner that can offer value, absolutely not. So, it's working with him, seeing that challenge. Definitely had a minute where I was like, boy, I did not pick right on this one. But he's got a person who is his person, and it's not me. It's one of my volunteers, and it's really amazing to see that bond. And that's my therapist friend. And so in her mind, she just sees so much in him with that is parallel to the adolescence that she's worked with in her practice. He's 12 and he's just this angsty teenage boy. And yeah, he kind of is. And it's been amazing to see, okay, you didn't fit what my expectations were. Let's reframe those expectations. And that's just relationships in general, right? Like, you can choose who you surround yourself with, but you also have to make a commitment to people in your friendships. Raising your kids, they're not always exactly what you anticipate. They don't react, maybe they don't have the same interests as you. You have to figure out what are the dynamics here, and how can we make this work where everyone is finding value and peace and happiness.
Yeah, and I think those negative labels that we put on things or people they can be something that are defining to that animal or to that person. And what a difference it makes when we can kind of step back and say, okay, maybe we can look at this from a different angle. Something my husband and I talk about a lot is almost every strength that you have is also like paired with a weakness. So like, I'm a little more flexible, but as a result, I'm sometimes not as on time as he would like me to be. So the way that we choose to view that is just so important to the outcome.
No, I love that. Actually, that's a great way to say that, because every strength you have, if you look at it through a different lens, could also be something that is a detriment. So you have, that's your perspective on life. You're in charge of your own happiness, and so how you see things is it's critical. Makes or breaks it.
As time kind of draws to a close, what is maybe one piece of advice that you would give someone who's either seeking relief from the struggles of the world or some kind of healing?
I think it's going to be to find something where you feel both safe and challenged. So it's going to be, if it's horses, if it's something else in relationships, it's going to be, I enjoy this, I love this enough to put in that work. And you find the strength within to be dedicated to that, and you just show up every day. And ultimately you're going to see positive change, and if you're looking for it, it'll be there. And I think that's the number one thing. Take that step, and every day take another little step.
That's great advice. I think it's really easy to have those internal needs buried, those things that we're really drawn to, buried by the responsibilities of life and all
Yeah.
the things we should be doing. So
Yeah,
that's so
you gotta
powerful to,
make time for yourself. Yeah, you gotta find it. It's essential. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not able to put into your work or your kids, your other relationships.
yeah, that is very good advice. And tell us a little more about your actual organization and what you do and how people can support you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Equine Connection Center is a place where people can come for equine assisted learning sessions, but we are also open to people to be able to come here for wellness. And so that's very unstructured. If you want to come here and be a member of our farm, it is very similar to leasing, but within the lens of equine assisted learning. And my goal is to create a place where spending time with horses is accessible, and you have all the benefits of being able to walk out and enjoy horses, spend time with them, and have that space for mindfulness. It would be incredible to be able to continue to grow my Instagram community. I have so enjoyed working with creators like yourself, but also the smaller accounts, people who are just getting into horses, or have a couple horses and maybe don't know that much about equine welfare and are interested in the messages that we have to share to try to raise awareness on that. And so, although everyone in the Northern Virginia area is certainly welcome to come check us out in person and look into membership and things like that, I also have virtual membership, which is another way that people can connect with our horses and all of their unique personalities and stories. And information for that is available on our website.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think that's great. One of the benefits of our day and age, it's again kind of a pro and con, but we have access to so much information, and for people to be able to see into your world and see what you're doing and how you're helping people and your approach to horses can really give people who might be struggling with their animal the boost they need, and also just to provide ways for people to integrate into the natural world. We don't have the same access as we've always had. So I love you kind of mentioned that your membership's a little bit like a gym membership, which I thought
Yeah.
was great because, we have gyms all over the world. How incredible would that be if we also had just natural environments with horses where people can go and kind of reset mentally and grow some of those skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that, everybody would be able to have access to do some mindfulness work with a horse, because it's truly something that has changed my life in doing that. So I love sharing it with others.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here and sharing that with us. I loved hearing about the work you do. I think it's incredible how you have just grown this community and kind of taken on this challenge that kind of slowly grew from your life
Yeah.
into sharing this with other people, because I think we both know just something about being around horses just instantly can change the way you feel, how your view of the world is, can soften the struggles that you might be facing. So I think it's incredible the work that you're doing, and thank you for coming on here and talking about it and talking about your horses and how they can help humans and help us heal.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that. It's been wonderful chatting with you.
Thank you for joining us and learning about horses that heal and the humans who help them. We hope you'll continue with us on this journey. We'd love for you to subscribe on your favorite platform and follow The Touch of a Mustang on any of the major social media outlets. Please share with your friends, anyone who loves horses, or anyone who might be struggling and could benefit from this message. If you have felt the healing power of horses or help them in their divinely appointed mission, please reach out. We want to hear your story. As we say goodbye, always remember that the horse is always there to help you.